Professor! I got it open!
Good heavens, man! Great Scott, we've discovered the fountain of all knowledge of Egypt in the entire world. Do you realize the importance of this moment, Smedley?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you see the brilliance, the untold years?
I see it, sir.
This can't be, man.
What?
You know what this is?
What is it, Buna?
It's the Book of Life.
Book of Life.
In the beginning, when man arrived on Earth, the black gods did leave their spacecraft, and they walked, and they named the beasts of the sea and the animals of the land.
Heavens.
And man in his blackness did walk the earth, making medicine.
Medicine?
They discovered time. These were all black people got down. Wait a minute. There ain't nothing in here about whitey. This is ours, Jack. Wait till the brothers hear this.
Buna.
I'm gonna get this book out of here, baby. This tells the real tea. Check this out.
Control yourself, don't you see?
What you mean, Jack? Look at this here. Black people started the music and the brain surgery back in the year 3 BC.
Yes, of course, Buna.
Man, they was getting down. This is it, brother.
Yes,
Everybody gonna know about this. Listen, we can change the history. Civilization will be changed.
By all means.
Yeah, this is gonna be it.
Get the bulldozers, there's nothing here.
But.
Shut up! Good heavens, time for tea, eh?
What?
As a self-described cultural memory specialist, Anthony Browder shares and celebrates ancient African history as it really happened, instead of the distorted image that the media portrays. After 30 years of research, he's discovered some things that might even surprise the most ardent African history fan. In 2008, Anthony Browder started the first Egyptian excavation series funded by African Americans. Isis, Horus, and Osiris were thought of as a holy trinity. By whom?
By the Greeks. The names Isis, Horus, and Osiris are Greek names. They're Greek names for African personalities. Now, we mentioned at the top of the show that I refer to myself as a memory recovery specialist. So let me just play that role for a second.
Please do.
We're here in Washington, D.C., and the most obvious symbol of the capital of the wealthiest and most powerful nation in human history is an object that is known as the Washington Monument.
Yes.
It stands in the geographical center of what was originally the 10-mile square of the capital of the United States of America. Now, that symbol is an ancient African symbol which represents the resurrection of an African king named Asar, whose name was later changed by the Greeks to Osiris. So that symbol is the oldest symbol of resurrection known to man. And I might add, Rock, that symbol was developed in Africa, principally in Kemet, the country that the Greeks renamed Egypt. That symbol is over 6,000 years old. And it represents a man, Asar, who was the founding father of Kemet, the nation of the black people. And Asar was murdered by his brother. His body was cut into a variety of pieces. One story says 14 pieces, and scattered throughout the land. Asar's wife, Aset, who's known as Isis to the Greeks, searched throughout the Nile River and found 13 of the 14 parts of Asar's body. She laid each of the pieces out and literally remembered her husband, washed his body with oils, wrapped his body in bandages, and created the first mummy in human history. And as she was about to bury her husband, she grieved, as any wife would grieve, because she was about to bury the man that she loved. She also grieved because, according to a story that is over 6,000 years old, a story with plenty of documentation that I see every year when I travel to Egypt, Aset was also a virgin. And before she buried her husband, the spirit of her deceased husband, Asar, came and impregnated her. And then 9 months later, the virgin Aset gave birth to their son, Heru. Now, according to some versions of the story, Heru was born 6,000 years ago on December the 25th. So we have, within the story of the founding Paris of ancient Kemet, Asar, Set, and Heru, the fundamental story that would later be incorporated incorporated into the Bible as a story of Jesus. And so there's a difference between belief and knowledge. Belief is something you accept without proof. But knowledge, whether it's religion or science or law, is based on facts.
This is Horus. He is the sun god of Egypt of around 3000 BC. He is the sun anthropomorphized, and his life is a series of allegorical myths involving the sun's movement in the sky. From the ancient hieroglyphics in Egypt, we know much about this solar messiah. For instance, Horus, being the sun or the light, had an enemy known as Set, and Set was the personification of the darkness or night. And, metaphorically speaking, every morning Horus would win the battle against Set, while in the evening Set would conquer Horus and send him into the underworld. It is important to note that dark versus light, or good versus evil, is one of the most ubiquitous mythological dualities ever known, and is still expressed on many levels to this day. Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east.
The people of Kemet established the oldest culture known to man. It was in their day what the United States is today, the most powerful nation on the planet. So people came to Kemet from all over the world. People came without a religion, studied the spiritual traditions in Kemet, and then left with a concept which they then introduced to their people, which became known to them as religion. But if you look at the origins of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you will see beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are rooted in ancient African spiritual traditions. Sigmund Freud knew that. In the book that was published shortly after his death, Moses and Monotheism, Sigmund Freud said that the origins of Judaism are Egyptian, that Moses was an Egyptian.
In the Old Testament, when Moses comes down Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, he is very upset to see his people worshiping a golden bull calf. In fact, he shattered the stone tablets and instructed his people to kill each other in order to purify themselves. Most biblical scholars will attribute this anger to the fact that the Israelites were worshiping a false idol or something to that effect. The reality is, the golden bull is Taurus the bull, and Moses represents the new age of Aries the ram. This is why Jews even today still blow the ram's horn. Moses represents the new age of Aries, and upon the new age, everyone must shed the old age. The ancient Egyptians, along with cultures long before them, recognized that approximately every 2150 years, the sunrise on the morning of the spring equinox would occur in a different sign of the zodiac. This has to do with a slow, angular wobble that the Earth maintains as it rotates on its axis. It is called a precession because the constellations go backwards rather than through the normal yearly cycle. The amount of time it takes for the precession to go through all 12 signs is roughly 25,765 years. This is also called the Great Year, and ancient societies were very aware of this, and they referred to each 2150-year period as an age. From 4300 BC to 2150 BC, it was the age of Taurus, the bull. From 2150 BC to 1 AD, it was the age of Aries, the ram. And from 1 AD to 2150 AD, it is the age of Pisces, the age we are still in to this day. And in and around 2150, we will enter the new age, the age of Aquarius.
I grew up in a Christian household. My grandmother was probably the most religious person I ever met in my life. She took me to church, and every time I went to church, I would ask questions. Yeah. Why don't I see people who look like me in the Bible? Why, and I asked, and she would say, just don't ask questions.
Yeah, like my mom did.
And so that developed in me an inquisitive mind, and led to me asking questions that I wasn't supposed to know the answers to. And when I, as a college student here at Howard, would go home and have conversations with my grandmother about some of the things that I was learning, I realized that my grandmother was not prepared for the information, to receive the information that I learned. But because I loved my grandmother, I respected her and didn't try to move her beyond where she was. Because she needed Christianity. She needed her belief in Jesus Christ in order to help her deal with life in Chicago in the 1960s. But what I know, based on studying history and science, is that the story of virgin births in many cultures is based on mythology. We're told that Jesus was born in a manger. We're told that 3 wise men came to visit him. They followed the star that was in the east. Now, this is based on astronomical phenomena, because around the time of December the 21st, we have the solstice, with the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year. And from December the 21st through December the 24th, literally the sun is still. The length of the day does not increase nor decrease significantly. So the sun is still. On December the 25th, that is when it was written in ancient texts that the sun, the S-U-N, was born, because the day began to lengthen by approximately 1 minute per day.
From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the days become shorter and colder. And from the perspective of the northern hemisphere, the sun appears to move south and get smaller and more scarce. The shortening of the days and the expiration of the crops when approaching the winter solstice symbolized the process of death to the ancients. It was the death of the sun. And by December 22nd, the sun's demise was fully realized, for the sun, having moved south continually for 6 months, makes it to its lowest point in the sky. Here a curious thing occurs. The sun stops moving south, at least perceivably, for 3 days. And during this 3-day pause, the sun resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross, or Crux, constellation. And after this time, on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, this time north, foreshadowing longer days, warmth, and spring. And thus it was said, the sun died on the cross, was dead for 3 days, only to be resurrected or born again. The birth sequence is completely astrological. The star in the east is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which, on December 24th, aligns with the 3 brightest stars in Orion's belt. These 3 bright stars in Orion's belt are called today what they were called in ancient times, the 3 kings. And the 3 kings and the brightest star, Sirius, all point to the place of the sunrise on December 25th. This is why the 3 kings follow the star in the east, in order to locate the sunrise, the birth of the sun.
So if you had all of this knowledge happening in Africa back at least, I would say at least 1000 BC, then it would make sense that others would come here to learn this science and then go home and then declare themselves to be the originator of medicine or the originator of philosophy, which is essentially what the Greeks did. But in their early writings, they acknowledged the fact that this source of information came out of the Nile Valley, came out of Egypt.
Attis of Phrygia, born of the Virgin Nana on December 25th, crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected. Krishna of India, born of the Virgin Devaki, with a star in the east signaling his coming. He performed miracles with his disciples, and upon his death was resurrected. Dionysius of Greece, born of a virgin on December 25th, was a traveling teacher who performed miracles such as turning water into wine. He was referred to as the King of Kings, God's only begotten Son, the Alpha and Omega, and many others. And upon his death he was resurrected. Mithra of Persia, born of a virgin on December 25th, he had 12 disciples and performed miracles, and upon his death was buried for 3 days and thus resurrected.
I've got people in my family who hit me across my head and say that everything about that you're talking about in ancient Egypt was paganism.
Well, all pagan means is someone whose belief is other than your own. So in that context, to a Christian, a Muslim is pagan. You know, to a Jew, a Christian is pagan. So if we look at the story of the birth of Jesus the Christ, it is a story of cultural significance, mythological significance, and astronomical significance that means 3 different things to people who have an awareness of this story and know how to interpret it.
This is why Jesus and numerous other sun gods share the crucifixion, 3-day death, and resurrection concept. It is the sun's transition period before it shifts its direction back into the northern hemisphere, bringing spring and thus salvation. However, they did not celebrate the resurrection of the sun until the spring equinox, or Easter. This is because at the spring equinox the sun officially overpowers the evil darkness, as daytime thereafter becomes longer in duration than the night. and the revitalizing conditions of spring emerge. Now, probably the most obvious of all the astrological symbolism around Jesus regards the 12 disciples. They are simply the 12 constellations of the zodiac, which Jesus, being the sun, travels about with. In fact, the number 12 is replete throughout the Bible. Coming back to the cross of the zodiac, the figurative life of the sun, this was not just an artistic expression or tool to track the sun's movement. It was also a pagan spiritual symbol, the shorthand of which looked like this. This is not a symbol of Christianity. It is a pagan adaptation of the cross of the zodiac.